There was no medical explanation for what lay before the doctor. The once pregnant lady was no longer pregnant. Not that she lost a pregnancy that was supposed to be 8 months old. The baby had mysteriously vanished from her womb. A little over 2 weeks ago, she was a perfectly healthy pregnant woman named Ranye. Her last visit at the antenatal clinic was uneventful, and she and her husband Ugo happily and patiently waited for the arrival of their first child. But things went dark one night while both of them were fast asleep. The digital clock on the bedside table read 2:58 a.m. when a thick fog swept over their neighborhood. It grew thicker around the house the couple lived in, completely enveloping it. The air was then filled with the soft whimpers of a baby, which grew louder and turned into a cry. It pierced the silence of the night like a sharp crystal and reverberated throughout the neighborhood. It could have awakened everyone, but it didn't. No one could hear it except Rene, who was awakened by it. Her breasts felt heavy and sore. Her silk nightgown felt heavy, and it clung to her while she got up from the bed. She turned on the lights to examine her gown, which she realized was soaked with the fluid that flowed from her breasts. She was lactating heavily. As she made for the bathroom to clean herself up, the cries intensified and her belly began to hurt, which she thought was due to Braxton Hicks contractions. But the pain got worse and she stumbled back into the bedroom and leaned over the bed. The fluid that flowed from her breasts gradually turned pink and thicker than regular milk. She took a few Lamar's breaths, but the pain became too unbearable for her and she screamed. And this awakened Ugo, who upon seeing her quickly got up and rushed to her side. "The baby," she said as she took her husband's hand and held it tightly. "We have to find the baby." He too could hear the cries that resonated throughout the house. He helped her onto the bed and made her as comfortable as possible. Then he left her in the bedroom and went downstairs to the living room. He grabbed a torch and the key to the front door, which he unlocked and stepped out of the house. With the torch, which he turned on, he searched the front and backyards for the crying baby. Eventually, he found it nestled in some thick bushes. But the thing he found, which cried like a baby, was not a baby. In fact, it wasn't even any known natural creature. Although it had a vague infantile appearance, everything else was wrong with it. Its skin was rough and looked like it was made of wood. It had no eyes, but empty sockets that were dark like bottomless pits, and its mouth looked like it was painted onto its face with red paint. Ugo bent over and picked up the creature and cradled it like a baby. He rocked it while repeatedly saying, "There, there, Daddy is here." The creature continued its cry as the man carried it into his house. He arrived in the bedroom, and when his wife saw him, she held out her hands longingly to receive the creature which her husband handed over to her. She held it close to her chest and looked at it with a smile on her face. She didn't see the monster for what it was. To her, it was a helpless and hungry, crying child. The tears she saw flow down its cheeks melted her heart, and she held it close to her in a protective and caring manner. The creature had projected itself in the minds of the lady and her husband as a helpless baby, Its powerful mental manipulation warped their minds, making them not perceive its monstrous appearance. Then the lady pulled down the neck of her soaked gown and pulled out a breast which now leaked a bloody fluid. The lips that were on the creature's face parted and formed a circle which dissolved into a hole lined with needle-like teeth, and with this it latched onto the breast and began to suckle. Instantly a feeling of relief washed over the lady. Not just relief from the belly pain, but complete elation. There was nothing to worry about anymore. It was just her and the creature. It was just her and the baby. She closed her eyes and leaned back to rest her head on the pillows which had been propped up by her husband behind her. The mental manipulation further affected the couple, making them to care about nothing else but its own comfort and safety. Days turned to weeks, and Rani remained in the bed, her body slowly withering away while the creature suckled. Under its mental grip, Ugo remained at his wife's side, tending to her needs with unwavering dedication and never questioning the reality that had been so cruelly snatched from them. As the creature continued to feed and grow in size, her pregnant belly shrunk, and neither she nor her husband took notice of this under the mental control of the creature. All the lady knew and cared about was the thing that suckled from her breast, and her husband's sole purpose to provide the maximum care and comfort to his wife and the child. For the duration the creature fed, he didn't go to work. He remained at home by his wife's side. Finally, after the creature was done, it detached itself from the lady and stood over her unconscious body. It had increased in size and looked more human than it previously did. Then it hopped off the bed and out of the room through the window. The lady's husband, who was lying beside her, felt slightly dizzy, and when the dizziness cleared, he suddenly felt strange. He couldn't explain what he felt, but he knew that something had happened, something which he couldn't completely remember. He knew he heard his wife scream, but everything after that was a blur. He felt his wife resting on him, and he turned to adjust her. Then, to his horror, he noticed that her belly was flat, and he saw the large red stain on her gown. Frantically, he got up and shook her slowly while calling her name, but she didn't open her eyes. Her breathing was shallow, and her body burned with a high fever. It didn't make sense to him, as much as he remembered she was in perfect health before both of them went to sleep. But now, somehow, she was terribly ill, and the pregnancy had mysteriously vanished, and her gown soaked with what looked like blood. Confused and not understanding the situation, he reached for his phone to call the paramedics, but his phone was dead. He looked out through the window and saw that it was dark. He grabbed his car keys and quickly lifted her off the bed and carried her out of the room. He carried her downstairs and into the garage and put her in the car and drove her to the hospital. At the hospital, he couldn't give answers to the nurses and the doctors who questioned him about her condition. Her breast bore a bite mark, and it still leaked the reddish fluid that resembled blood. Quickly, she was admitted in the ICU, and medical tests and examinations done on her couldn't explain her condition. Her blood tests and analysis of the fluid that flowed from her breasts showed the presence of skin cells, bone cells, and several other cells that aren't supposed to be found in blood. These cells were in much higher concentrations in the breast fluid. Further analysis revealed that these cells possessed DNA that matched the DNA of the lady and her husband. They were in fact fetal cells, the remains of the missing unborn child. But there was no way to explain how large amounts of these cells were present in her blood. And nothing could explain why her breasts produced the fluid that flowed from it. No matter how much the doctors questioned the woman's husband, he couldn't give an answer. All he knew is his wife was pregnant, and somehow the pregnancy was gone within a few hours. She had come for her antenatal assessment earlier today. Yesterday, he corrected himself. And she was told that all was fine with her and the baby, Ugo said to the doctor. But her last visit was about 2 weeks ago, the doctor that spoke to him replied. With puzzlement, the young man stared at the doctor. No, it was today, the young man said. The doctor stared at him for a bit and tried to convince him that his wife's last visit to the hospital was 2 weeks ago. But the man didn't believe him. Then the doctor pulled out his phone and held it in front of the man to see. The date on the screen clearly showing that 2 weeks had passed. To him, only a few hours had passed, but somehow several days had passed with him not realizing it. Somehow, he had lost track of time, and he couldn't explain why. In his frustration and being totally worn out, he sat down and began to think and process the situation. Then, like a dream or a vague memory, he recalled bits and pieces of everything that had happened. He recalled hearing the cry at night and finding a deformed creature and carried it. The memory flashed to seeing his wife cradle the monster which latched onto her breast with its terrifying mouth. The shock of this realization jolted him back to reality, and fear washed over him. "Oh my God," he said under his breath as 2 policemen approached him to question him.